So joining Dr. Kapnick on stage now are two speakers who will share their perspective on what this new physical reality does actually mean for capital markets participants. I'd like to invite on stage Jay Ko and Paul Bodnar, and I'm going to introduce them while they come up. So Jay and Paul are two of the inaugural collaborators with the MSCI Sustainability Institute. The Institute is providing analytical support for a framework that is developed by the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group that is aiming to demonstrate climate resilience as an attractive and a scalable theme for private sector investments. So this initiative, which is supported by the Bezos Earth Fund and Climate Works Foundation, is designed to channel capital towards investment strategies that can produce a climate resilient transition. So let me introduce Jay and Paul. So Jay Ko is chair of the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group, otherwise known as GARI, or Gary, I think Paul calls it Gary. So in his day job, Jay is co-founder and managing director of the Lightsmith Group. This is a private equity and venture capital firm that addresses critical social needs. So before founding Lightsmith, Jay was a partner at the alternative investment firm Sigler Guth. He also served as the chief investment strategist at OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. And then Paul Bodnar is the director of sustainable finance, industry, and diplomacy at the Bezos Earth Fund. He joined the fund from BlackRock, where he served as global head of sustainable investing, and he led the firm's sustainability policy and engagement. And prior to joining BlackRock, he was chief strategy officer at the Rocky Mountain Institute. Paul has also served in the Obama White House as special assistant to the president and senior director for energy and climate change at the National Security Council. Thank you both for being with us, and I'm going to turn the conversation back over to you.
Fantastic. So I feel like I sometimes speak at a high level that doesn't help with investors. So I think, Paul, we should start with you and say, you've been talking about how investors like decarbonization as an investment theme, but we're going to start loving resilience. And sadly, it's also a growth industry. So can you define what you mean by this and give it context?
Thank you, Sarah. And first, let me just congratulate MSCI on the launch of this institute. MSCI is such a powerhouse in the financial markets, and we're so excited to see what you do with this and really excited to be collaborating with you. And Sarah, I'm just glad my job title doesn't involve being responsible for the surface of the sun. So I'm feeling better already. But yeah, so look, I think if you're here at Climate Week working on finance, you're probably focused on decarbonization. Maybe you work on nature, but chances are you're not focused on resilience. Yet decarbonization and resilience are the two entwined fundamental economic adjustments of the 21st century, and they have to be dealt with together. And the good news is, if you're listening to this not so rosy forecast and you work in finance, the good news is you can do something about this. And what I would suggest, and what we've been working on together, is that we need to do the same thing for resilience, what investors have come to understand about decarbonization and transition, which is that it is a growth industry. And we've seen the power of what happens when capital floods into decarbonization as an investment theme. It becomes available all throughout the investment chain, from venture capital to infrastructure to listed equities and fixed income. It reduces the cost of capital for companies. It sends a really strong signal to entrepreneurs and young talent that this is an area you should go into because the financial resources are there behind you to innovate. We have not done that for adaptation and resilience. It's thought of by investors generally as, as a line item in a government budget. But even though adaptation and resilience has a price tag, and it will be costly for society, that price tag is not fixed. It's a function of how fast we innovate. It's a function of how fast we can drive down the cost of the technologies, products, and services that not only governments need, but also households, like air conditioning, and businesses, right? So when we think about resilience in relation to business, we often think about climate resilient business. And what I think we have the opportunity here to do is to think about the business of resilience. And yes, again, it's unfortunate that we need to be doing this, just like healthcare, the healthcare industry is in a sense unfortunate that you need a whole industry to deal with the fact that people get sick. But we have made the planet sick, and we need innovators and entrepreneurs to be generating the technologies and solutions. And it is a thematic growth market. So what I mean by if you like decarbonization, you're going to love resilience as a thematic growth industry is, a lot of folks are really focused on decarbonization despite some fundamental uncertainties about how fast this market's going to move, depending on policy, and will governments do their part, and will we go this fast or this fast or this fast? That uncertainty isn't really there for resilience, unfortunately, right? We will see climate impacts go where they go. I mean, you're best placed to advise us on this, but almost regardless of what we do on decarbonization in the near term. And so it's a really exciting theme for folks to look at, and that's kind of the basic thesis.
Yeah, the climate will only stop changing when emissions go to zero. So both of you have also talked about how investing in this is very thematic investing. Can you talk about what the opportunities are, how building the portfolios, the opportunities, the challenges of it?
Yeah, sure. So it's great to be here, and congratulations again, Linda, and the whole MSCI Sustainability Institute launch. I think it's fantastic to see the rigor of the data and analytics that have been proven out so robustly in the markets applied to new frontiers and to collaborate with a whole range of stakeholders that I think can really shape the conversation going forward. I think data is going to be critical to all this. And that's one of the themes that comes out of this. So at Lightsmith, we have the first private equity fund focused on this adaptation and climate resilience theme. And what that means for us is really, unpacking that, because nobody wakes up in the morning and buys a loaf of adaptation. You don't, shelter in adaptation or fill your car's gas tank or energy system with adaptation. You buy energy that's lower carbon. You buy energy that's more resilient, right? You buy food that's more resilient. And that's how I think this entire transition is going to go. So to pick up on Paul's theme, and then to kind of unpack what we really mean by that and the types of opportunities we were thinking about, I just want, as investors, to charge everyone in this room with the following question, which is, what do you have more certainty about between now and 2030? The trajectory of interest rates, the pathway of artificial intelligence, consumer behavior, or the fact that climate change will continue to unfold along a predictable range of physics and time, right? So Mizuno-san has talked about having a strong policy signal and having the clarity of that signal. The ultimate regulator right now is physics. It's going to tell us, and the scientists have told us, between now and 2030, there's very little we can do to just adjust the amount of carbon in the atmosphere fast enough to change the trajectory of risk and impact that we're seeing going forward. This was the hottest year on record. It's the coldest year of the rest of your life, probably. And we know that with a fair amount of certainty, more than all these other factors. So what does that mean? Well, to unpack that, what you now know is that all the things you're going to need, if you assume complexity, risk, and impact are going to increase, will become more valuable. And you want them to become more valuable. So risk analytics, catastrophe risk modeling, weather analytics, novel instruments being created about insurance are going to be much more valuable going forward. Data and analytics about agricultural productivity, about supply chain management in an atmosphere where you're having disruption of the supply chain by the war in Ukraine, by sanctions, by labor disputes, but now increasingly complex issues of climate impact. You cannot ship full container loads through the Panama Canal. The Mississippi River is no longer passable to barge traffic. This is really going to cause major financial disruptions and compound the issues that we're seeing in other parts of the economy. So data and analytics on a sector-by-sector actionable way in the private sector that can help people make better decisions in agriculture, in water, in supply chains, in real estate. And then on top of that, solutions in water, in agriculture, even in healthcare diagnostics will become much more important. That was, we see disease vectors move because we're moving mosquito populations and changing the amount of air quality problems that we have because of California wildfires and other wildfires around the world. So all of these things, I think, represent a growth theme that will unfold, and you'll want it to unfold, right? As we need increasing amounts of tools and capacity to reach the challenge of the problem that we've created for ourselves.
Okay. So right now I think we're teaching the audience by learning. We're just telling them what we're thinking, what's going on, but both of you have actually done this work. So could you give quick examples of what you've learned by doing in the space from the investments you've made?
Yeah, I'll give you just two quick examples. One is a precision agriculture company that we invested in Brazil called Salimtech. So this company networks together farm production equipment and deploys weather sensors and other sensors across the farm production in Brazil. It covers about 95% of sugarcane production in Brazil. And the reason why it's being adopted is because it dramatically reduces fuel consumption, the application of pesticides, the application of fertilizer, the application of irrigation, because if you have better, more intelligent ways to deploy those inputs, you can save cost. And at the same time, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because all these things are very high carbon, high intensive GHGs, and they also increase your resiliency to climate change, right? You can be more able to manage irrigation costs and increasing drought areas, and really deal with the fact that we're going to have much more efficiency across food production. So that's an example. And then geospatial imagery and digital mapping, that's done in the public sector, but also now applied increasingly to manage supply chains, to manage these types of risks across the economy.
I'll just give a general example, which is think about wildfire analytics. If you're a utility, and now we've seen the biggest California utility go bankrupt because of liabilities associated with power lines that cause giant wildfires. It illustrates how decarbonization and resilience and nature are related, right? Because you need to understand how wildfire risk how it will change over time. You can't use past weather data to predict future. And that will affect the rate at which you're able to decarbonize the electricity system, because we need a whole lot more grid if we're going to electrify as much of the energy supply as possible and expand the grid. But how do you expand the grid while making sure you're not causing liabilities on the resilience side? And of course, from the perspective of biodiversity and other things related to nature. So that's just a great example of a specific technology or service related to climate resilient solutions that serves all three of these thematic areas: decarbonization, adaptation, and protection of nature.
Yeah. Actually, from that example, after insurance reinsurance, the utility sector has the largest number of disclosures in their financial reports on their adaptation plans because of that specific PG&E case, because created a case study that sector actually, more than any, has their adaptation resiliency plans. I wanted to make sure, Jay, that we talked about GARI with you up here.
Gary.
Gary, sorry. So can you explain the taxonomy for adaptation resilience, the work that's undergoing? Because I think it's a really important development.
Yeah, we're really excited at the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investment Working Group, or GARI, which is a 501c3 nonprofit here in New York, whose mission really is to bring stakeholders together: investors, asset owners, asset managers, credit risk agencies, scientists, and the industry generally, to talk about two issues. One, what is the impact on the value of investments of increasing physical risk and impact from climate change? And what are the opportunities created to invest by the need for climate resilience? And the project that was announced yesterday that was described is a discussion paper that's being developed that will attempt to prove the background feasibility of potential listed equities investment strategies that support, in companies that support adaptation and climate resilience. So the Adaptation Solutions Taxonomy, which is a very long description for a definition, was developed and released in 2020 after a peer review process, in an attempt to describe for normal humans what is a company that does adaptation and climate resilience, by identifying a climate hazard in the scientific literature, in a specific geography or a specific time scale, and determining whether a company can help us understand how that hazard plays out, and help to manage the risk of that. So what we're doing right now is updating the Adaptation Solutions Taxonomy. A lot has happened since 2020 in the European Union Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, in the Climate Bonds Initiative's work on resilient green bonds, in other areas, and our view of what's really happening and the needs of adaptation are also changing over time. So that definition, this taxonomy, will be released later this year and will help to try to define for investors and other stakeholders what are the kinds of companies that actually fit this definition. What does it mean to invest in adaptation? And that I think can lead to many types of strategies in venture capital and private equity, and then very importantly, in public equities that make this accessible to investors and long-term asset owners is a theme.
So do you want to comment?
Yeah, it's just to add. So let's say you're interested in this theme and you say, actually, I do want to maybe look at this as a thematic play. You know, the questions that this project is answering is, number one, what is a company that is in the business of resilience, right? There are lots of corner cases to be resolved. If you make meals ready to eat that are supplied to victims of hurricanes, so you're doing disaster recovery. Is disaster recovery resilience or not, right? We have to resolve some of these issues in advance before we go big, so that we don't get tangled up in the same kind of greenwashing knots that we've ended up with in other areas of sustainability. So that's kind of the integrity side, which is what is and is not a resilience investment or a company that's in the business of resilience. And then secondly, how do you give investors exposure to this theme, right? So someone told me, and I should have done this fact checking before saying this on stage, but like the second or third largest maker of generators, which are obviously very relevant for resilience, is Kohler, which is a company you might associate with toilets. And so 80% of this company's business is in making bathroom equipment, and maybe 20% is in generators. Should you put that in your portfolio? If you do, are you getting exposure to resilience or to the market for bathrooms? Yeah.
Well, and a key part of that is sometimes resilience may have carbon as a factor in it, and so sometimes they're not pure plays, one or the other.
Sure. I mean, we've found that you can usually get both benefits, right? You can increase efficiency, reduce cost, reduce carbon intensity, and increase resiliency in the face of increased scarcity. So there are many situations like that. But if the choice of the future is not a tale of two islands, like decarbonization island and resiliency island. It's going to be a single future that needs to be on a trajectory that is low carbon and resilient. And the inevitability of climate change is something that's going to continue to play out, unfortunately, kind of forever, right? 2100 and beyond on the trajectory that we're on right now. So I think these are the things that we're trying to approach and provide a practical orientation in that taxonomy. We're really pleased to be collaborating with MSCI and others in the effort to develop this kind of background discussion and offer to investors a practical way to think about this important area and growth theme.
And that concludes our panel, so thank you again for talking about this.